Talkin Money.
And we're back. It's Talkin Money with Jeff Tarbell.
Good morning, week. Welcome to our last 15 minutes here in the studio today. It's a financial show, but I think the topic can be financially related, can be family related, can be it's part of the life. And in the studio today, we have Brad DeHaven. He's an author of a book that I was very happy to read. And I'll tell you what, if somebody throws a book at me and says, "Here, read this," there's always that little hesitant, like, okay, I got to read this book. It took me 3 hours. I want to say it's an easy read. In a sense, it's pretty easy to follow along. But it leads up to, like I said, you sitting in a parking lot in front of Safeway,
right,
with a wire, with again about 20 sheriffs and police officers sitting in the bushes and parking cars and behind the buildings, waiting for a drug bust to go down. How does a parent get to that point, and help us understand why you were there?
Well, I really obviously never planned on that being the case. My son, drug addicts for years have been, let's say, persuaded by the police to turn in the next biggest dealer to get off of their charges. And that was basically what the police were trying to do in my son's situation. My son was very, very ill at the time. He was 6'2". I think his low was 127 pounds. And he was having a really hard time complying with that. So he was facing a prison stint. But the police did set up a little sting, and there was a mess up in there, which I discuss in the book, and that is that a number was given out that was a known police undercover number. So my son was outed as a potential snitch, if you will. But, the word snitch is thrown around pretty easily, but I think we're all snitches. If somebody backed up on my lawn and peeled out, I'd call the police on them or whatever. But anyways,
so you're sitting there looking at 5 years for your son.
Yeah, and I couldn't envision that. I couldn't envision my beautiful wife going to prison like my mother had, or my younger son going to prison like I had for my older brother. I just couldn't allow it to happen. So I was sitting at the police station, and I suddenly just burst out and said, "I'll do the bust." And of course, they didn't want anything to do with that. And again, I do discuss that in the book. But essentially, I was able to talk them into, quote unquote, doing their job. That if I was able to present this dealer that they wanted at a time and place and choosing of their desire, would it count for my son's bust? So I kind of went rogue, and I portrayed myself as an old guy with a prescription for OxyContin, which was highly sought after by these dealers. And then I was set up basically to be robbed by this dealer in that parking lot. So a lot goes through your mind, and as I mentioned before the break. Oh, and by the way, somebody called we've had a few calls for me to repeat the website. It's rxdrugaddict.com. So if you go there, you can contact me. If you have a school you want me to talk at, I'm happy to talk to. If you have a group or anything like that, I do it. I do not charge for my services. It's my passion to help with this epidemic. So anyways, I ended up in that car, and I write this book from that perspective, because after I did what I did and it didn't end well, I really realized in the end I was just enabling my son. I was enabling my son, like so many of the parents that I talk to every single day, to continue doing what he was doing and not face the consequences of his own actions. And even if those consequences meant prison, honestly, I would rather my son be in prison than be on the streets. And I remember telling my son when he was in rehab, "You're in the best place in the world that you could be, and the second best place in the world that you could be is prison." And when you've sunk that low, when you've lowered your bar as a parent, I know you guys both have younger kids, but when my son was born, I envisioned sports star first. Since it's a sports station, I'm going to go ahead and admit it. I was, going to have a sports star as a son or a doctor.
You were a soccer coach?
Yeah, I coached soccer. I coached baseball. I coached football at Granite Bay High School. I tried to do everything for my kids to get them involved, golf, you name it. We built a car together, everything to be the father that I never had. And yet there's a Y in the road where your child ends up just something as simple as taking a medication that a doctor gave them, and then it calls to them. It was like that lady that called earlier that was a Vicodin addict. Her biggest fear probably is that her daughter would try Vicodin, and that it would call to her daughter like it called to her, and that it would escalate to the point that she had an addiction.
Right. One of the one of the things we had talked about, it's real easy for parents to stand back and say, my kids aren't doing it.
Right.
If I give a statistic and say, hey, my 50% of high school kids smoke pot, let's just throw that out there. That's a number. 99% of the people are going to say my kid is in the bottom 50%.
Exactly.
Right? They're not in that group that does.
Yeah.
They're in the group that doesn't.
Right.
So there's a natural, I don't know.
Defense mechanism.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
saying,
there is.
It's not me. You walk around with a drug test in your hand.
Right.
And one of the things I said is great. You have this drug test. It tests for, 6 different groups? Or
Right. It'll tell them if they're on meth or oxy or an opiate or a pot or whatever. It'll tell you right there instantly in your hands. You can get those drug tests. You can get them from my website, and on my website there's also other resources and things like that too, including breathalyzers. You can breathalyze your kid when they get home. For $50-$60 you can buy a breathalyzer, and your 16-year-old walks in and you can breathalyze them. If they've been drinking alcohol, you're going to know. It's not going to blow 0-0. If they haven't been drinking, it's going to blow 0-0. If it blows anything else, they've been drinking alcohol. It's foolproof. It's not what are the signs and symptoms. It's I'm sorry, but the results are in.
Right. Help us understand a little bit. What do you do now then? You go out to high schools?
I do.
You send out I understand, an email blast to Placer County or?
Well, Placer County School District embraced this actual radio show and sent out an email blast to give extra credit to their students that would write a report on this. I think the health and safety students, and encourage the parents to listen. So I hope that they're out there listening and getting that extra credit, because this is such an important topic. I do speak to the high schools at that level. I speak to parent groups. I do get the denial. One of the things I tell parents, I say, the interesting thing about you and your preteen child is that you have something really in common here. You say your child will never do drugs, and your child thinks that they'll never become addicted. So one of the things I show at the high school level is on my website on the media tab. There's actually a video I took of my son when he was going through withdrawals, and I do not suggest it for the weak at heart. It is horrific. And it is very difficult for me to even talk about right now, let alone when I'm at the high schools and I show it. But when I show it to the kids, my son understands why I show it. And at first he was a little upset that I was showing it until he read 100+ letters from one high school. That was one of the most pivotal moments of the speech, when they got to see what the end of the rainbow is. Because when your kids are being offered drugs in a party environment or a school or an after-school event or at church or wherever, it happens everywhere. They are being told, this will make you fly around the room, this will make you feel great, this will make your head spin, you're going to see colors or flashes. They don't tell them, here's what it is when it's all over. When this drug owns your body, here's how it's going to punish you if you don't keep feeding it that drug. So you'll keep feeding it that drug, and you'll do anything you can to get that drug. You will sell your body, you will steal from your parents, you will steal from your grandparents, you will rob. How many times have we heard lately about people walking into a drugstore and saying, give me your Oxycontin or give me your drugs, with no mask on? These aren't even, talk about, they have one focus. They have got to get high because they know their body's going to shut down on them.
Right. You had made a comment. You go to some of the more affluent areas, you open up a medicine cabinet, and there's a few Vicodins and a few maybe Oxys from injuries, or someone had dental work done or something. But you go into some of the poorer areas and there's not. Do you see that? Is that a reality?
It is a reality. Somebody that walks into their doctor looking like just a normal guy and says, hey, I've got back pain and I need a bunch of, the strongest that you can get, is more likely to get those prescriptions than somebody that walks in looking like a meth addict that's been on the streets and has no teeth and says, I need drugs. They know that they're drug shopping. People do desperate things to do drugs. I talked to one family back east, and they completely cut their son and the doctor off of all prescription medications, and he went out into the garage and pulled a workbench over on his leg across another bench and compound fractured his leg so that he could go to the hospital and they would pick him up and they would give him pain pills. That's how badly his body craved his next fix, that he literally compound fracture broke his own leg.
You look
it's shocking.
Back, we talked earlier again at the beginning of the show. There's two different groups we're talking to. We're talking to the people that already have this issue or potentially are knee deep in it and are sitting home right now listening.
Afflicted by addiction, I call it.
There you go. And then we're looking at the people that are living in denial or are just trying to get educated because it could be there at some point. And there is that fine line between, hey, it's just pot, right? Or it's just a couple beers.
Right.
But how do you address that with the students? How do you really try to get through to them? Because, I've read articles about the front lobe right, of a teenager's brain and how it slowly
Developing,
develops
yeah.
and understanding consequences. How do you get through to the teenager to say, yeah, it may just be pot, but it may not be, or it may just be one pill at a party?
Right.
How do you get through to them?
Well, parents want to believe the best in their children. It's a natural instinct. And so when they do catch them with one pill, of course, it was the first time or they only took one. But I will tell you that it's been my experience, if your child's willing to tell you that he took 3 Vicodin, he probably took 30. It's just, that's the way it is. I'm sorry. But, and unfortunately, heroin's made a real resurgence because they're starting to change the formularies on some of these drugs like Oxycontin so that they cannot be injected, they cannot be smoked and what have you. But they're also introducing other drugs at the same time that can be injected and smoked and what have you. But heroin's making a big, and I talk to parents all the time that are in highly affluent areas that are crying on the phone to me and saying, my 20-year-old, my 18-year-old is a heroin addict. I talked to a parent 2 weeks ago whose 15-year-old overdosed from heroin. 15 years old, overdosed from heroin. So they missed a lot of signs leading up to that. So how I address it is, whatever you think it is, lock up your meds. Get them out of reach. Watch where your children are going. Don't fall for some of the stupid excuses of, I mean, I talk to addicts all over the place, and they use excuses that parents will buy. I'm going to church. I'm going to synagogue. I'm going with a group of people to practice soccer. You need to check on those things. They sound like legitimate excuses, and they're quick dismissals by parents that, great, my kid is embracing our religion and is meeting with a group of children.
You got an example?
Yeah, I do. You know, unfortunately, the young lady that I interviewed that was prostituting her body at 16 used to tell her parents that she was going to a meeting with synagogue. And at synagogue, and I'm not blaming any particular religion, it just happens to be her story, was the first time that she ever tried a ecstasy, and it was handed around at synagogue. So these kids would get together and tell their parents that's where they were going, and all the parents would be joyous over the fact that they were embracing their religion, but yet they were out there spinning around the room and seeing colors and taking ecstasy.
So help us understand too. Your next book, is a continuation of your story, or what are you looking at for this next book?
I would say my first book was more how addiction defined me and how I dealt with it, and of course the oddity of a white collar financial planner going undercover is pretty bizarre. But I write the book from that perspective, from sitting in the front seat and all the thoughts that flow through my mind and what brought me to that parking lot in that moment. And my second book is really more, I would just kind of say, my letter to parents, because I talk to parents all over the United States every single day of my life, and I'm not making that up. I mean, sometimes 3 a day, sometimes none for a day, but I average at least every day, and then I talk to groups as well. And my new book, The Addict Among Us, is what it's going to be called, and it goes to my editor next week, and will be ready sometime this summer. But it is my letter to parents and calling out and going over all the symptoms, signs, conditions, things like that you need to do as a parent and be aware of, because it can happen to your child. Your child can become addicted. And for you kids out there that think it's not going to happen to you, my son didn't think it was going to happen to him either. He thought he could handle it, and he ended up nearly dying from it. And I've talked to far too many parents whose children have died from it and can't turn back, and their lives are forever changed and forever destroyed. They are haunted forever.
Hey, Brad, what's the best way to get a hold of your book?
I think if you go to my website, rxdrugaddict.com, you can order it directly, and then you can donate a portion to one of the wonderful charities that I have on there. There's a drop-down menu. I think that's the best way, and then I'll sign your book, and I'll ship it direct from Sacramento. And you can also call our office, which is 916-486-7600, if you want to talk to me personally. But
Okay, Brad, thank you very much. Troy, thanks for coming in. I want to thank Jeff for letting me be on the air. And listen next week. We're going to be talking about Facebook and how it affects your life. Have a good weekend.